We've an early morning date with Tricia and her guests at 3 o'clock. But right now, some more topical and controversial issues investigated on Tonight with Trevor McDonald.
Tonight, the road to Britain. Dramatic pictures of the frontline war against illegal immigrants. Human cargo, how desperate stowaways cross the channel.
They're in Calais, they're on the seafront, they're by the hoverport. Wherever a lorry will park, they'll try and get in.
Targeting the truckers, the drivers who are getting the blame.
I have a family to feed, I have a mortgage to pay, and now I'm out of work. What do I think about that? Makes me cry. Makes me cry.
Also tonight, anarchy in the UK.
The problem is that it is a symbol of capitalism at its extreme.
Was this their vilest hour?
There are people around who are sufficiently subnormal to think that they achieve something by doing this.
And the tabloid king and queen.
If I see hello and she's on it, I will buy it because I want to know what she's doing.
Media playthings. But who is using who?
I think they're media hounding whores, and I think that everyone's very bored seeing them splashed all over everything.
The stories that matter to you. Tonight with Trevor McDonald.
Caught on camera, just minutes away from their illegal ride to Britain. Good evening. Rows over so-called bogus asylum seekers have made immigration one of the public's key concerns. And as the Conservatives continue to call for illegal immigrants to be detained and deported, the government's brought in a string of measures to stop them getting here in the first place. One of them is to punish lorry drivers caught with stowaways on board their vehicles. So more and more truckers are fined. But are they being targeted unfairly? Jonathan Maitland reports on the frontline war against the immigrants on both sides of the channel.
Dover docks last week. A young boy is lifted out of the back of a lorry, closely followed by his mother. 2 of 8 illegal immigrants found on board. The Home Secretary was there to see this human drama. It provided an election photo call and an opportunity to plug his new policy, which is to fine drivers who are found to have stowaways in their vehicles.
It is sensible for us to put this burden on the truckers because the truth is, and everybody knows this, the majority of those who are coming in hidden in the back of the lorries have done a deal, or the facilitators have, in folding money with the truckers.
But is it really the truth? For the last 3 weeks, we've seen for ourselves how desperate immigrants are making their way into the UK. And far from helping them to do it, we've seen how British truckers are doing everything they can to keep stowaways off their trailers. If anyone's to blame, argue the truckers, it's actually the French. This is the reality. It's night time in Calais, and gangs of immigrants wait under a motorway bridge a few hundred yards from the harbour. Our thermal image cameras catch them waiting for the chance to board a British lorry, unheard and unseen by the driver. On this occasion, they were so desperate to get in, they ripped the side of the lorry open. But the trucker was alerted, and the would-be stowaways disappeared into the night. Veteran drivers like Terry Jackson and Norman Steele are used to being targeted by illegal immigrants. What worries them now, though, is that if it happens again, they'll be breaking the law, because if they're caught with stowaways on board, even if they know nothing about them, they face stiff fines. As a result, they daren't stop in Calais.
You go to the garages outside of Calais, outside of the docks. They're there. No matter which garage you go to, they're there, trying to get in. If they've got the chance to get in, they'll get in.
Tonight, though, the men do have to make a brief stop to fill up with diesel. On this occasion, a passing police van deters would-be stowaways. But had Terry and Norman stopped a couple of hundred yards down the road, at this filling station, it could have been a different story. Here, a group of immigrants are hiding and waiting for their chance to board a lorry bound for Britain. But soon they too melt into the darkness. The French police, who knew we were filming, are maintaining a high profile. But that's something they rarely do when the cameras aren't there, according to British truckers.
that's all the immigrants now, and obviously the British government's kicked their arse about not doing anything. In 10 years driving, that's the first time I've ever had them come around here and check them. You come round to this area of Calais and you're always on your guard to see who's wandering around. It's just second nature.
Once in Dover, Carl found 18 stowaways on 2 of his lorries. Luckily for him, this was before fining came into effect, or else it would have cost him £36,000.
I checked the truck when I drove onto the ferry, and there wasn't anybody on it inside the trailer then or underneath the trailer. And I went up to have my meal on the ferry, come back down. As I drove off, all I saw was a Stanley knife coming through the side of the trailer and 2 people jump out. Unbelievable, isn't it?
The police patrol is long gone, but the immigrants are still waiting for their chance to steal on board a British lorry despite the torrential rain. And just before midnight, they see their chance. The driver is oblivious. Because of the noise of the pumps, he can't hear a thing. Meanwhile, they've got the door of the lorry open. Normally, all of them would now get in, bar one, who would stay behind to reseal the door. But the trailer is so tightly packed, even though they've got the door open, they can't get in. We break the news to the driver, Tony Edwards, and he checks his trailer just in case.
You try and keep an eye out and do your best to try and stop it. But it's just, what can you do? We're trying to do a job and you don't need this on your plate. You know, day after day. It gets to a point you can't really stop in France or Belgium anymore. It's not safe to do so, as you've seen yourself.
But with more and more immigrants desperate to cross the channel, the problems faced by British lorry drivers are only going to get worse.
This is a giant warehouse on the outskirts of Calais, and it's run by the Red Cross. It's basically the last step before the promised land, because thousands of immigrants get put up here before embarking on the final stage of their journey. Everybody who comes here has one thing in common, and that is to make it to England, no matter what it takes.
Red Cross workers say that only about a third of the people here are genuinely fleeing oppression. The rest, they say, are simply trying to find a better life.
They are looking to cross to England because they think that England is a country where they can find a job immediately. They understand that it will be not a normal job, if I can say like this. It will be a job on the black market, but they want to begin to work as soon as possible.
The introduction of fines for lorry drivers found to be carrying illegal immigrants into the UK had a huge impact here, at first at least. But by the time we visited, the wannabe stowaways were as eager and as busy as ever.
I don't know exactly how they tried to hide themselves in the lorries. I know that the first day, the second day of last week, people here, they were very afraid, if I can say like this, afraid. That they thought it's finished, it's over, we cannot cross. But now I see that situation is like 2 weeks ago. People go, people cross.
In fact, it was immigrants from the warehouse who were caught on our nighttime cameras. On this night, none made it onto a British-bound lorry, none that we saw anyway. But plenty do make it. Currently, about 200 stowaways a week are caught trying to get into Britain. Nobody knows how many more make it through undetected.
When it comes to stemming the flow of illegal immigrants into the UK, the French are our first line of defence. To a certain extent, we rely on them, and French customs officers say that they're doing their best. But with hundreds of stowaways slipping through the net every week, there's a growing feeling that their best simply isn't good enough.
Is it still or not? No, I've just took the seal off now. Okay.
The Road Haulage Association has accused the French authorities of not taking the search for stowaways seriously. And certainly, while we were filming here, most lorries simply had their papers checked or were waved through without any checks at all. Customs officers do sometimes use an X-ray scanner, though, to look into the backs of lorries entering the Channel Tunnel. And here, it clearly shows 4 stowaways hiding behind pallets. It's a great bit of equipment that, in many cases, could save lorry drivers their livelihoods. But the trouble is, today, it doesn't seem to be working. Many British drivers reckon that the authorities in Calais don't actually want to stop the stowaways getting to Dover.
What do they do with them when they catch them? I mean, if you follow what they do, they'll put them into prison. But if you had a hidden camera on them, right, especially down at Calais docks, you'll see them walk back out of the police station a couple of hours later. They want them to go across. They don't want to stop them here. Because once they've gone across there, they're off their hands.
Once it was working, the French customs were keen to invite us back to film the scanner again. They say it's helped catch 800 stowaways in the last 12 months, although they admit that's not its main purpose.
Each time the scanner is working, we use it to the maximum. But the problem of stowaways is not the overriding objective of customs. It's the objective of the border police.
Before long, the scanner's on the blink again, this time because of the heavy rain. The next morning at Calais docks, there's supposed to be round-the-clock security here, but this driver is taking no chances. Just a few yards away, we spot two immigrants trying to board a British-registered lorry. First, they try to climb up the side of the trailer. Then they try to get underneath the vehicle to hang on to the spare wheel section. The ferry is only a few hundred yards away. But they walk off as we raise the alarm. Two security guards question them and then let them go. The result of desperate immigrants and lax security at the French end of the Channel is that in Britain, innocent truckers are being stopped and fined for having stowaways on board. In the first month of this new policy, drivers and haulage companies have paid almost £1 million in fines. One of the victims is Ken Poynton. Immigration officers found 5 Iraqis hiding in the back of his lorry in Dover on Good Friday. His company was fined £10,000 and Ken lost his job.
I'd just returned on a trip from Spain, which was a non-stop journey, so they couldn't have gotten anywhere from the Spanish border to Calais. On arriving at Calais, I fueled up in an industrial estate there, an unmanned fueling point. It was there in the middle of the night that I presume they got in.
Are you happy that you did everything you could?
Everything I could have done has been done. The doors were secured. I walked around the vehicle. I checked the vehicle when I got on the boat. There was no sign of entry. What's happened in the long run is I've lost my job. I have a family to feed. I have a mortgage to pay like everybody else. And now I'm out of work.
What do you think about that?
What do I think about that? Makes me cry. Makes me cry.
Ken's not the only one to suffer. His boss, Carol Sanders, is selling the lorry in order to pay the fine. And she's on the brink of going out of business.
We've followed every single rule that anybody has given to us concerning being watchful, being vigilant. My drivers have taken no money to let the immigrants on board. It has to be stopped. My business is likely to be closed down and I've done nothing wrong.
I can't comment on individual cases because I don't know all facts, and I would also put it to you, you probably don't know all the facts as well, but my officials...
Well, I do, so I've just been talking
my officials are skilled in this, that they investigate properly, they're fully trained immigration officers. They will check with the driver to make sure what the system of security that they had in place. They would also check to see what measures they used on the day. They'll check to see how often all the checks were done. But very many people will have a story to tell.
Meanwhile, back in Calais, more immigrants wait for their chance to board a British-bound lorry. So far this year, 7,000 illegal immigrants have successfully smuggled themselves into the UK, and almost all of those were hiding in the backs of lorries. The upshot of all this is that the British government could be making some of its own citizens scapegoats for the increasing amount of human traffic into the UK. Many British drivers and their bosses believe they're being made to suffer for something that quite simply isn't their fault.
Tonight, the government insists that its policy of targeting lorry drivers is working and says the number of illegal immigrants entering through Dover has dropped substantially. The Road Haulage Association says that 3 British trucking companies have lodged appeals against their fines. These are test cases, and if they're successful, many more will follow. Coming next, the trouble with Posh and Becks. Are the media darlings suffering from overexposure and terror on the streets? Who were the anarchists behind London's May Day mayhem?
They said, right. They bowed down, they changed the jackets, they put the balaclavas on and charged through the breadth of the crowd.
Welcome back. The brutal thuggery and violence perpetrated by London's May Day protesters was shocking enough. But for most people, the attacks on monuments honouring our war dead were inexplicable. So who are the people behind the violence, and what were they trying to achieve? Fiona Foster reports on the self-proclaimed anti-capitalist groups whose protests inevitably end with rioting.
We come in peace, they said, to dig and sow. We come to work the lands in common and to make the waste grounds grow. This earth divided we will make whole, so it will be a common treasury for all. The sin of property.
For one man, the defacing of Winston Churchill's statue during the May Day rioting was particularly abhorrent. The grandson of the wartime Prime Minister after whom he was named.
That people could be so stupid and ill-informed as to write fascist on the memorial to the man who, more than any other single individual, was responsible for the defeat of fascism and Nazism.
What was your overriding emotion when you saw what had been done to the statue?
Sorrow, tinged with outrage. Outrage that can happen in our society today. I mean, that there are people around who are sufficiently subnormal to think that they achieve something by doing this.
Graffiti daubed on London's war memorials, shops smashed and looted, nearly 100 arrests, and it had all been billed as a peaceful protest against capitalism. The prime mover in the day's events, a group called Reclaim the Streets.
They started in 1994 as an anti-car movement. They were a single-issue organisation involved in protests against bypasses, against roads, really with a very ecological slant.
Reclaim the Streets soon evolved into a mishmash of diverse groups espousing different causes, from human rights to social justice to debt, all gathering under the banner of anti-capitalism. A rally at Trafalgar Square in 1997 led to rioting and 29 arrests. Then the Stop the City Carnival in June last year turned into the worst riot since the poll tax protests. There were more clashes at Euston Station in November. This Monday, anti-capitalists gathered in Manchester to coincide with the demonstration in London. Alex Greenwood was in London, just a few feet from McDonald's. Reclaim the Streets organised the rally, but she doesn't believe the group was responsible for what happened.
Stood next to 2 men, they said, right. They bowed down, they changed the jackets, they put the balaclavas on and charged through the breadth of the crowd. There were 4 people who were responsible for smashing the front of McDonald's in and smashing the money exchange. 4 people in 5,000 is not very much. The problem specifically with McDonald's is that it is a symbol of globalisation and Coca-Cola imperialism and capitalism at its extreme.
Seasoned political campaigners like the singer Billy Bragg say there's frequently a violent minority who turn up. Ideally, they'd be prevented from disrupting things by the event's organisers themselves.
The small amount who turn up for violence are very often present on the edge of large demonstrations. I think really, in some ways, the majority of people who have, we really should start to think about some way to contain those kind of people ourselves, rather than give the police an excuse to pen people in Trafalgar Square.
But the police's problem with Reclaim the Streets, unlike other protest groups, is that there are no organisers to organise amongst themselves or to organise with police.
Most demonstrations are not only peaceful but quite amicable between the demonstrators and the police. There are usually 3 or 4 a week in London. The main reason for that is that demonstrators negotiate with the police, and they have the organisation that enables them to do that. This group do not have that kind of hierarchical organisation. In fact, they deliberately eschew it, and therefore there is nowhere for the police to liaise with, or no one with whom the police can liaise easily, and therefore arrangements cannot easily be made.
Tonight, one activist from Reclaim the Streets confirmed that not speaking to the police is a deliberate policy.
We tried our utmost. All the publicity, the websites, everything was to try and create a positive creative atmosphere. Yes, we're not going to talk to the police because in the end we're against the state, we're against capitalism. The police aren't going to facilitate us having a revolution and changing capitalism. That's not going to happen, especially after June 18th they wrote in their report, we are going to have a war of attrition against groups like Reclaim the Streets involved in June 18th. Now, wars of attrition don't suggest dialogue to me.
What about the daubing of paint on Winston Churchill's statue?
It was mindless. There was no point in it. What we were there to do was to plant vegetables, not put mindless slogans on statues.
So you condemn that?
It was stupid, yeah.
An effective clean-up operation meant that today's ceremony, marking the liberation of Denmark, was able to go ahead at the Cenotaph as planned. Those arrested will continue to appear in court over the next few days. From his underwear to her eating habits, we are spared almost no detail about the lives of David and Victoria Beckham. And although opinion polls suggest that we are sick of this never-ending media interest, newspaper and magazine editors know that celebrity pictures increase sales. This weekend, as the footballer approached his 25th birthday, the paparazzi were again out in force. We spent a week finding out more about the press obsession and the apparent public fascination with the soccer star and the Spice Girl.
Right, let's get going. Got to find David Beckham, all right? It's his birthday.
In tabloid newsrooms, the Beckhams are Britain's most wanted. This week, their hunt for pictures and stories about the couple was more intense than ever.
The only problem is he's actually not been spotted for nearly a week now.
I'm going to go to his parents' house in Hertfordshire. Well, Mickey, you've got about 6 hours to find him.
Right.
The Daily Sport has ordered a special birthday cake for the Manchester United star, and reporter Debbie Manley has been set the challenge of presenting it to the birthday boy.
It does appear from the massive media coverage that David and Victoria get, and have been getting for quite a long time now, that the nation is preoccupied with David and Victoria.
I think Britain has rediscovered a new Princess Di in Victoria Beckham. I think we need, in Britain these days, an iconic, tragic victim figure who's got a bit of glamour, who looks nice, who takes a nice photograph, and who's out a lot. So we see a lot of her.
There is a sense in which they are the ultimate aspirational couple, that most young people today would aspire, if they're young men, to be a world-famous footballer. And most young girls, their ultimate aspiration would be to be members of a pop group that is one of the biggest in history.
Going through places like this, you can actually see through all the windows of the shops. You can normally see if there's anybody interesting inside.
Trevor Adams is a paparazzi photographer. We joined him taking out the Beckhams' favourite designer shops, hoping to get that exclusive birthday picture.
they've got a little Brooklyn with them, then there'll be a Minder or two in tow as well, so you're looking for stuff like that. If they're here, there's a good chance we'll find them. We'll see their cars. They've got various different vehicles that they come to town in. Range Rovers, Jeeps. They've even got a big American four-wheel drive vehicle that they drive. We see all the cars regularly, so we know the registration numbers. We know what to look for. All the tabloids will want anything you can get on David and Victoria. A top exclusive would earn you thousands and thousands of pounds.
There's a great deal of curiosity, I suspect, about the nature of their marriage, because after all, Victoria, in many respects, people would say, is not a typical footballer's wife. That the classic cultural icon of a footballer's wife is someone who's relatively passive and quiet and just looks great. Victoria is clearly a very assertive young woman who's been part of a pop group which has made girl power, you know, put that on the agenda. So that tickles the public's curiosity now about the nature of their relationship.
And action. We have had dealings with Victoria, and quite honestly, we welcome any comment we should have to make. Since David's been with Adidas, I think he's had now 2 of his own specific adverts. Victoria's actually got a wealth of experience, obviously, certainly in the media, and I think that we've sat down before and we've actually discussed things, and it's useful to have. I mean, seriously, it is useful to have.
When you see them as a couple, she is the vivacious one. She's the one who talks, and he just sits there and he just looks at her. He seems to be quite fazed by people like Elton John and all the other guys. In fact, if you say 2 words to David Beckham, you'd be lucky. I don't think he can. I don't think he wants to try and even get into coping with the complexities of knowing who to talk to and who not to talk to when it comes to this sort of like society, media. So she's more talkative, and he sits there and really sort of talks to her, and then she talks to you, and it goes on like that.
The other thing, of course, that's very interesting about him is the notion of the flawed diamond. That in a way, if David Beckham was the brilliant footballer that he was, but didn't have this flaw about being sent off, he would be less interesting to us and probably wouldn't make it into the headlines as much. We find people who are very good at what they do, but also who have a flaw, particularly fascinating.
I think they're media hounding, publicity hounding whores, actually. And I think that everyone's very bored, generally, with seeing them splashed all over everything.
Why they should be plastered across the newspapers and the TV all the time, I have no idea.
I'm not interested. I don't know many people that are genuinely interested, but you'll still pick up a copy of OK magazine and have a good nose to it and see what they're wearing and stuff. So,
every day it infuriates me, the amount of money she's making, but I'm still fascinated by her, and I cannot help it. If I see Hello and she's on it, I will buy it because I want to know what she's doing.
OK feature Victoria and David in the magazine because when we feature them in the magazine, we sell more copies. Our readers absolutely love them. They're fascinated by every aspect of their lives. We sold well over 1.5 million copies of the issue of OK, which featured Victoria and David's wedding, and I think those sales figures speak for themselves.
There's no greater hypocrisy sometimes than the public. On the one hand, they will say, why don't you leave them alone? But then on the other hand, they'll lap up every little thing that's written about them. And at the end of the day, newspapers are a business, and they are, it's cause and effect. They are supplying what the public demands.
Well, you know, the thing about the two as a couple, which is in fact unbeatable, David interests the whole of the back page buyers. Then you've got the other side of it, which is Victoria Beckham, which all the girls buy. Now put together, you're actually taking the front pages, the middle pages for fashion, and you've got the back pages for this guy because he's always scoring great goals.
Daily Sport reporter Debbie has had no luck presenting the cake at the Beckhams' Cheshire home. The editor is putting increasing pressure on her and her photographer colleague to find the couple. They're now trying the neighbours.
Is David Beckham around?
I don't think so, no.
Oh, right. Have you not seen him today?
Well, no, I've not been here. What is it regarding?
From a newspaper, and there's nobody in at the moment.
Here we have more paparazzi in blacked out cars.
Photographer Trevor is also having no luck tracking them down, so he tries a few well-known haunts.
Posh and Beckham, anywhere in this area we would expect, if they're in town shopping and they want to be seen, this is the area they're going to come to, because they know that there are photographers hanging around in this area. So it's a bit of a PR exercise for them as well, I guess, in that they might think it's high time they splashed themselves across the papers again, and there's no easier way for them to do it than to come shopping in Knightsbridge and to get photographed free of charge.
It's now nearly 2 years since David's sending off in the World Cup against Argentina. Before the incident, the couple were big news. Afterwards, they became huge.
I think they deserve everything they get, and if they're putting themselves on public show, then they really deserve, you know, public attention and all the attention that they do get.
I think they bring a lot of the undue attention to themselves, so I think sometimes some of the bad publicity that gets warranted.
It's what I think is just middle-class envy in this country. Here are two aspirational working-class people who've made good. They've made good of, in Victoria's case, what seems to be a minor talent, but in David's case it's clearly an enormous talent. And they've become enormously rich in a very short period of time. And we don't like that in this country, so of course we've got to knock them down. The level of intrusion is quite enormous. They lead their lives, it seems to me, in a perfectly normal, acceptable manner. And yet, the intrusion seems to be at such a level that I think most people have gone under by now, and they clearly haven't.
David's birthday cake has now travelled 200 miles to Victoria's parents' house in Hertfordshire. The Daily Sport team are becoming desperate.
Because could have gone away for bank holiday, couldn't they? I don't want to think like that in a minute. I've come all the way down here. I don't want to start thinking.
I think they're not really being given a chance by the press, who are trying to shape their public image in a convenient way, which then helps the press sell newspapers. So I imagine that must be very distressing for both Victoria and David.
Our hotline number here, 01702 438811.
Following the incident with David having his hair shaved, we decided to run it as a feature and as a phone-in on the Sunday morning breakfast show. And so we provoked a response. Several listeners calling in saying, well, this is ridiculous. David Beckham has not only spent £300 on having his hair shaved off with Vidal Sassoon, whereas a regular customer would normally spend, what, £5, maybe £10 at the most at their local hairdressers having the same haircut done. Not only that, but he could have lost up to £4 million in advertising with Brill Cream. And it was then, about 10 minutes after we started the conversation, that Victoria Beckham called in.
It's Victoria Beckham.
Victoria Beckham?
Mm.
Where are you at the moment, Vic?
I'm at home, actually. I'm just having breakfast. And I've been listening to... Well, actually, I had the misfortune of listening to your radio station this morning. And I just wanted to ring and clear up a few things, OK?
No, please, go ahead.
Listen, you should know not to believe the newspapers, shouldn't you? And David hasn't lost any money from Brill Cream. So when you said he has no brain for shaving off his hair because he lost £4 million, you was actually wrong. He hasn't lost a penny, and I just wanted to ring and let you know that.
While you're on the phone...
Yeah.
Can I just... I mean...
And actually, is this going out on air, yeah?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
well,
we're live.
I'd just like to say that I have seen you, and people are right. You are on radio because you're ugly.
What?
I don't think Victoria really made it through her own talent. I think she used the media to get to where she is, and I don't think she can really complain about the treatment she's getting now.
Spends all the time looking for attention, and every time something's happening, she's used it.
They try to attract press attention and then they moan about it when they get it. So at the end of the day, if they don't want it, then they should stop being so flashy.
Victoria has always learned from the early days of the Spice Girls that publicity is what drives the fame, what makes people go out and buy records.
Who was it said that, you know, when you court fame, it's like riding a tiger. You can't get off when you want. That's what happens.
Posh and Becks actually do publicise where they go quite often. They phone up agencies and journalists and say we're going to be at a certain event, and if it's not them, it's Posh's sister. They sold their own wedding and then they complain when people want to take pictures of them on other occasions. Yeah.
They used to scream abuse at photographers and make a real meal out of it, whereas now, in my recent experience, they will just perhaps pause for long enough to make sure that somebody gets a picture, to make sure that they're going to be in the paper the next day.
These cucumbers are a bit hot.
They're courgettes, David.
We were going to do a sketch about Brooklyn's first birthday party and what that might be like. The planning of it, really. We weren't going to do anything with Brooklyn, but just the planning of that. And then when the news broke that they'd had the first birthday party, it was practically what we'd written that they might do, and ours was meant to be this sort of comedy fantasy of this would never happen, but imagine if it did. And it had. So you think, oh, right, okay, where do we go from there? What's left, you know?
These peas are still in their pods.
They're mange too, David.
Victoria and David seem to have taken over from, as the subject of Essex Girl jokes, about their dimness. I certainly wouldn't say they're academically inclined, but my God, to be that dim and that rich, they must be doing something right.
It's just us walking around like this. It's quite a shock to see how many people, you know, do look at you. And even people that do think we're them, they've like taken the mickey, like sort of said, oh, thick and that. Like little kids are saying stuff around us because they think we are them, and they're saying nasty little comments, you know, and that's how they're portrayed to be, and I don't think they're like that at all.
I think the abuse levelled at David on the field is really pitiful. It's really appalling to hear. It's of a nature that is deeply upsetting, I would think for both of them, because it's of such an overtly sexual nature. And I really, really think that for him to every week, every day, go out on the pitch and take this without, it seems to me, any reaction at all, most of the time, there have been occasions when he has responded, I think what a terrific young man he is.
Do you want us to give it to David?
Yeah. Yeah, don't mind, yeah.
As time runs out, the Daily Sport finally get to present their cake. Not to the Beckhams, but to a friend of Victoria's sister. No exclusive picture, as the couple themselves were nowhere to be found. So maybe they're not as publicity hungry as people like to think. Maybe they preferred to celebrate his birthday with a quiet night in.
So did you have a good day at... What's it then, David?
Yeah, it was all right. Scored 2 goals.
Oh, good. What are goals again exactly?
The latest chapter in Britain's favourite real-life soap opera. We're taking a final break now. When we come back, Michael Nicholson's journey to the heart of darkness, the terror facing Zimbabwe's farmers and their families.
You are now our enemies because you really have behaved as enemies of Zimbabwe.
Welcome back. Yesterday, Zimbabwe's white citizens received a chilling new warning. Change your ways or leave the country. For the first time, President Mugabe rounded on whites living in the city suburbs, branding them enemies. Observers now fear that there could be more attacks on whites in the wake of the campaign of violence which has already claimed 2 lives. Michael Nicholson has been to Zimbabwe to meet some of the victims and to see the terror in which many white families now live.
When David was murdered, Maria and the children not only lost their husband and father, they lost their house, their farm, all their belongings.
In Africa, they say, where there is not tragedy, there is farce. Here in Zimbabwe, they're both coming in equal portions. This is the tragedy. Maria Stevens, a widow, comforting and comforted by her children. Her sadness touched the world.
I'm not a very good gardener.
Maria is fighting hard to come to terms with what she's lost. She lives in borrowed clothes in a borrowed house. She has nothing, and she doesn't expect the farm's insurers to pay her a penny. Yet, for 19 years, ever since they were married, she and David reckoned they'd found in Zimbabwe their perfect place.
Living on a farm is wonderful because we could be outside the whole time. We could do what we wanted. We could create our ideas. Maybe we're pioneers, but on the other side, I wouldn't like to compare myself to the old stock because neither David or myself took land from anybody, misplaced anybody. In fact, we did the opposite, because when we got our farm, there was only one family living on it. We provided work for a lot of people. We bought the farm in a black country from a black government, from a black man.
You bought it from a black businessman with permission of the black government, with money borrowed from a black government,
Yes.
and yet that black government now says you grabbed the land.
Yes, that's right.
Violence came to her and her family, as it did other white farmers, because of their support for the Movement for Democratic Change, the MDC. It was Maria that persuaded husband David to join it. It cost him his life.
I cannot blame myself, because if I blame myself, I will not be able to go forward. This happened in a very unfortunate way. It, of course, shouldn't have happened. It got out of hand. No one can control the war vets anymore. And it was a private vendetta by a man in our district. I've had enormous support, incredible support from people in Zimbabwe and from internationally. Absolutely amazing. And in fact, that's why I can sit here and talk.
Look, Doggy's sleeping in the sand. You see that? Pips is sleeping.
I would like to stay here. I would definitely like to stay here, but I'm not going to stay here if we continue having a bullying government like we have now. My husband was a good man who stood for incredible qualities for this country, and he was proud of Zimbabwe and Mugabe. That is ironic, that he was one of the few men who actually thought, with this man we're going to go forward.
I first met Robert Gabriel Mugabe 25 years ago, soon after he'd been released from 11 years detention. Even so, his talk was of reconciliation.
I am not opposed to the white man staying in the country. I don't hate the white man.
You don't hate him after all?
I don't hate him.
And how is changed now?
You are now our enemies because you really have behaved as enemies of Zimbabwe.
What are we supposed to do? Fold our hands and say, you're the ordained ones by the Almighty, by virtue of your skin and by virtue of your being British, royal blood, every one of you.
Right.
To those who remain the masters of yesterday, the racists of yesterday, we say true justice shall be meted out to you.
Intolerant, corrupting Mugabe has stoked the fire of racial hatred, and he's paid the price. Half the workforce is unemployed, inflation is 70%, yes, 70. Interest rates are 80%, the currency is worthless, and foreign investors are running away. Tony Hawkins is Professor of Business Studies at the university. He's been monitoring his country's economy for over 30 years.
Almost with every day that goes by now, we're seeing this decline in confidence. People who even myself actually, who a week or 10 days ago were much more optimistic than we are now. I think what is happening and what we're hearing, and particularly what we're not hearing around us, does create a sense that this time it has gone too far and it will take a long time to recover. I must say, I've interviewed you many times and I can't remember you ever sounding so depressed.
No, I don't think I've ever been so depressed.
Mugabe has now turned his so-called war veterans on the black workers as well as their white bosses on the farms. No one on the farms knows if they are on Mugabe's hit list or not. It seems so random. Pig, cattle and tobacco grower Jim Sinclair and his wife Anne know for certain they are on the list. They've already been invaded once.
They have to be a certain size to meet the export quality assurance program.
Jim has been obliged to sell another of his farms to the government already.
We sold out in '84 to government. It was a thriving little farm, wasn't a big farm, and it was too far away for us to manage it from here, so we sold it. And very little has happened on it since then.
Just wasted.
Virtually nothing. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think the world needs to know is that this government has acquired a lot of farms on which nothing has happened.
In all the sheds you've got here, Jim, how much money you got stashed away here?
Well, in pound terms, probably about $500,000. It will be sold over the next 6 or 7 months. The selling period is just starting now.
But the fact that it's here in these sheds, the fact that there are people out there willing to come in here and set fire to it must be a hell of a worry for you.
It is a worry, because now we don't see the forces of law and order able to assist us.
I mean, in the old days, if something happened, you could depend upon the army coming in, the police coming in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now you can't?
No, you can't. I'm depressed because I can see the possibility of, A, losing this for myself and my family and my children and their children, but also because the country could lose something of great value. I mean, this country has got something that other African countries to the north of us don't have, and that's a thriving, performing commercial farming sector. And it doesn't matter the colour of the people that are doing it, it exists and it's working. Why do we want to destroy that? I just don't understand it.
I've lived here my whole life. My father built the house, and we felt that we were really contributing to the good of the country.
That doesn't seem to count for much now, does it?
They don't consider that anything at all. I mean, as Jim said, in any other country you'd be rewarded for the work he's done, but here they just want to take your land away.
And there's actually a contingency plan in Britain to take 20,000. But I mean, where would they go to?
People ask if we've made a contingency plan. I don't think you can make a contingency plan for an atom bomb or the roof falling in. You know, something that happens, and then you've got to do what you've got to do. But we can't make contingencies really when we've got not just the family dependent on us. When we've got 75 families working in this business, our employees, and we have a duty to them as well.
People are afraid about this intimidation.
Yes, they are. I would say yes. They are very afraid of the intimidation.
And it could change people's minds?
Yes, it could. Definitely it is going to change. And I would think that is why maybe the ZANU-PF, they postponed the elections from April to May, because they wanted the chance to motivate people and to persuade people and intimidate them.
I'm not going to ask you how you will vote, but is this intimidation going to change your mind?
No. I've got my vote and my secret.
If there's one success here, it is, or was, tourism. With so many African countries plagued by coups and calamity, Zimbabwe offered safety. The wildlife parks were big foreign currency earners. Tourists are a sensitive lot, a whiff of trouble, and they book elsewhere. An old friend, Wilton Banga, says there'll be a long time coming back. And this would normally be packed, wouldn't it? Yeah, I mean, they'd be queuing up to get on this boat, and we're the only people on it.
There's very little tourism. In fact, tourism was the fastest growing industry in Zimbabwe over the last 10 years. Lately it's suffered enormously. You know, even Victoria Falls, you go there. Normally in the past, I mean, I knew you had to book well in advance, 3-4 months to get into a hotel there. Now you can book any time.
It's very sad, isn't it?
It's wonderful scenery. I mean, you come out to the
lake. But nobody's going to come out here when they're slaughtering people 10 miles up the road, are they?
No, of course not. The only way to solve it is to solve the political problems.
Yeah, easier said than done, Wilf. Yes. Easier said than done.
Yeah.
For the first time, across race, across ethnicity, we are all united for one purpose and one purpose only. That is to create a new Zimbabwe.
Morgan Tsvangirai, leader of the Movement for Democratic Change, is Mugabe's only opposition and perhaps Zimbabwe's last hope. How certain could the white farmer and the white Zimbabwean be that he has a home here?
Well, first and foremost, this is not a racial issue. The white farmers are just being used as an instrument of scapegoating. What we are talking about here is that everyone must feel confident to be citizens of Zimbabwe.
This is not really a struggle for white man's land. This is a struggle for democracy, fighting one man's determination to stay in power. But is he rash enough to risk Zimbabwe's self-destruction to do it? If you were to ask me whether I think it's going to happen that way, I'd say that good and bad here are finely balanced. You know, Zimbabwe is not a big country, it's not a rich country, but it's always been a hopeful one. And there is still time to claw back what's been lost. And there are enough decent people here determined that Zimbabwe will not go the same way as some other African countries. It's a beautiful country with vast potential. And all it needs is a decent man to take better care of it.
Michael Nicholson reporting. And that's nearly all for tonight. Next week...
Well, both can go, or
I'm not oversure about now, you.
They may drive slowly, but they usually drive carefully. So why are doctors and police calling for new tests for elderly drivers? Are mature motorists the latest menace on our roads? We'll have that report next Thursday at 10. For tonight, from me and everyone here, good night and thank you for joining us.